I find this kind of surprising. There it is. That's my hot take. See you later. No, the Pokemon Company posted a video on their channel where Pokemon Champions co-director Kazumasa Iwao and designer Shigeki Morimoto talk about the game. They talk about the battle system in particular and, kind of why Pokemon Champions exists the way that it does. And these are the words that they say, which are relevant. I think one of the biggest reasons behind it was that the battle system, the rules for competitive Pokemon battles that we've been using throughout the Pokemon series for so long, may gradually start changing as the Pokemon series moves forward. And when that happens, there are people who have been enjoying the existing style of Pokemon battles for decades, going all the way back to Red and Green, Gold and Silver, and so on. So simply saying, the battles have changed, so now please go play the new version, didn't really feel right either. That was something that had been bothering us at Game Freak for quite a while. At the same time, we obviously want the series to continue taking on new challenges, but we also didn't want to neglect the battle system we've had up until now. So we thought maybe it would be good to make one game that carries forward the existing battle system and lets people continue playing it indefinitely. I think that was really the starting point for the development of Pokemon Champions. So basically what they're saying here is that Pokemon Champions is the way that it is just that classic turn-based gameplay, because that gives them a little more leeway to be a little bit more experimental in the games going forward. And we already basically did know this, at least to an extent. You know, you look at something like Pokemon Legends ZA, they wanted that to have like a competitive scene kind of independently of the main games, because it's got its own unique battle system that was, we've never seen in any other Pokemon game. It still uses the whole 4-move system, but it's all active, a real-time version of that. So like we get that. We get the Pokemon Champions was going to be like the competitive standard. So no matter what happens in the games, you've always got this version of the combat, this version of these moves that is going to work in a certain way, just kind of like all across the board, going to be a much cleaner competitive format. What is surprising to me is hearing that they're looking for leeway in being more experimental, not just with the spin-off games, or rather the, the Legends games have been described by the Pokemon Company as mainline. And I think, like, to a degree, you could see them as mainline, and yet there's a very clear split here between the actual mainline games with their dual releases, Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, and then the Legends games, they've got their own little name, their singular releases, and those are the ones that have actually been experimenting. We saw real changes to the battle system in Legends Arceus, and then of course Legends ZA was the biggest shakeup in series history. Even if on paper you could still kind of consider these mainline, it really did seem like the Legends name was a real separation from the mainline games, and that was what gave them leeway to experiment a lot. So like I kind of thought that was what they were doing. That was their way. This was their testing ground. So to hear that, no, they really do still plan on making changes to the main battle system and the actual dual release mainline titles, that's really interesting. And I'm kind of two minds about it. On the one hand, I think it's great because I personally do want to see the series do new things. I really loved all the changes made in Legends Arceus. It wasn't like absolutely perfect, but I like what they were going for. And then ZA, like that was, to me, that was the most fun Pokemon has been in just such a long time. I want changes. I want shakeups. Even if they're not like going all in on the real-time combat thing, we really don't know if that is something that they're interested in doing, or if they're really just talking about very small changes. That is what's so interesting about all this, is like we don't know like how far they're thinking of going. It could just be little tweaks here and there, more in line with Arceus, where there's just like kind of like one little extra element, but for the most part, it's still kind of the same basic combat. Whatever the case though, I want to see them try new things overall. And yet, on the other hand, I know that there are a lot of people who absolutely don't. And that's like completely valid. That's the thing about Pokemon. It sells so absurdly well because it just hits such a broad audience. It's so accessible, it's so approachable for so many people, and people have been playing these games in many cases for several decades, kind of like their entire lives now. Clearly, they like the products. They like the products the way that they are. And when you take a product that has been a product thing or a series of products, a line of products for a very long time, and you start to change it, you're gonna get at least a percentage, whatever percentage that may be, of the audience just being like, you're changing the heart of it. You're changing what this thing is. You're changing it into something that I don't really like as much. And sure, they can say, well, that's why Champions exist. But that's the thing about Champions, is it's just the fighting. For the most part, it's just the combat. Like, really, it's the mainline games that are going to be feeding into Champions. You play the mainline games to get the Pokemon, to have the Pokemon and go on the actual adventures. And then you take those Pokemon and you put them into Champions. You know, how many people are just competitive? Like, out of all of those, like, tens of millions of people who buy every single Pokemon game, how many of them are playing it just to raise up competitive Pokemon to play in Pokemon Champions? I bet it's not, like, all of them. You know, like, it's definitely, I don't know what number it is, but it's not gonna be all of them. It's not even gonna be close. Pokemon is a very, very, very casual series. So, like, how much are you willing to change? And it's particularly surprising seeing coming from the Pokemon Company. As we know about the Pokemon Company, they like to make their money with the Pokemon games. They really enjoy it. It is their favorite activity to do. Make the money from the Pokemon games. So it's kind of surprising that they might be considering doing something that could potentially compromise how much money they could make on some of their games. Now, of course, again, we don't know how much they're actually looking at changing. It could be very, very small things. And if anything, maybe you could argue that because they want Champions to be kind of the competitive standard, it could be that all of the games, whether it's Legends games or the mainline games, the main mainline games, it could be that these changes can never be that big. It could be that no matter what, you're going to want to have, like, enough similarity between titles that you can bring these Pokemon into Champions and still have a similar enough experience. They're compatible. You know, I can play Pokemon Legends ZA, and I've got this Pokemon, and it's got these 4 moves, and, you know, it works very, very differently than it does in the turn-based games, but I can still bring that Pokemon over to Champions, and they still have the 4 moves. And look at that, I can even, you know, change the 4 moves based on the actual requirements of turn-based battle. You can change the stats and all that stuff, but you still, like, the Pokemon itself, you still have the Pokemon with the access to these moves. Like, it's still compatible for the most part. If you change it too crazy, too wildly, then you may have compatibility issues. Will that all by itself mean that we're not talking about anything crazy here? We're not talking about any real massive shakeups. It's still, for the most part, going to be, here's the Pokemon, here are its stats, here's an ability or something, here are the moves that it has access to, here's generally what they do, even if what they do is gonna kind of change from game to game. I mean, what does Pokemon like to do? They like to give us games with, like, you know, a couple of new things each time. They like each game to have its own kind of gimmick. And, you know, maybe they're running out of, like, the big, you know, like Mega Evolution, Terastallizing, Gigantamaxing, and all, you know, maybe they're kind of like running out of, like, the thing that you do once per battle, and so now they're kind of looking at just, like, combat itself, you know? They want to experiment a little bit more like that. Oh, here's going to be, like, a new battle mechanic that's a little bit more baked in to the actual, like, you know, mechanics, the way that combat actually works. So in this new Pokemon game, or set of mainline games or whatever, you're going to get this little change. You can still import these Pokemon into Pokemon Champions, and it'll work more traditionally, but over here we get to have our fun, have our little, you know, our little selling point. Ultimately, I don't even know how much these are selling points. It kind of just seems like no matter what, we're going to buy the games, kind of no matter what the gimmick is. But I don't know. Again, I really do like that they want to experiment with these things. I think that is good. And then, of course, a big question is, does this mean that we're going to see some sort of shakeup, some sort of experimentation in Wind and Waves? I really don't know. I know that there's been a lot of info, from the big leaks that happened a year or two ago or whatever. The thing is, like, the further we go, the less and less relevant all of that becomes. But I want to say it sounded like Wind and Waves was going to be pretty traditional, so I don't know how likely it is that we'll see some sort of weird combat thing in this one, but could it be, the next ones, the next mainline games? I'm not really sure, but I do think this is very interesting. It's very, very interesting. I think it's I think it's great. I'm happy to see this, and it certainly makes me more curious than ever about the future of Pokemon, especially Wind and Waves. And now I really am, like, pretty eager to see if we're going to get any kind of weird little shakeup to the way combat system works, even if it is just another little thing, kind of like in Legends Arceus, where it's like, the strong and agile style, just like a little... It's not like reinventing the combat like in ZA. It's just kind of like an extra little thing. I don't know. I would really like to see that, but I guess we'll wait and see. See, okay, I just thought of this, though. It's like, okay, I kind of like drew a comparison between like the battle gimmick, now like the combat change is going to be the new battle gimmick. I just realized that would be a bad thing, because that means that they're going to give me some sort of really cool new battle gimmick that or like actual combat change that I really like, and then they're going to ditch it. They're going to ditch it right away, and it's going to make me mad. That's going to happen. Like, I really wanted to see the strong agile style thing continue, but I wasn't too upset when it didn't continue, because ZA brought in its own really, really big change that kind of overshadowed the old one. But at the same time, like, if the next Legends game doesn't have real-time combat, if they just do like a different thing, or if like we keep getting these cool changes that don't continue, it really does just become like the new little thing to play with and then leave behind. Not gonna like that. I don't like that. I hope that doesn't happen. Change and experimentation are good, but landing on something really, really, really good and then leaving it behind can be less good. I don't know.